Okay, everybody. Good evening. This is not the video lecture. It is my recording the lecture that we were supposed to have in week number 3, but I know both you couldn't make it. As I said, I wanted to speak to each of you individually about your research topic. Um, by the time you get this, if I haven't spoken to you yet, please be sure to call me 724-433-5467. And again, the reason I want you to call me is because my plan tonight for our live lecture uh, was supposed to be that I would speak to each of you while we were at class about making sure that you had nailed down the research topic and the research question that you plan to use uh, for your projects throughout this course. Um, and as I said last week, and when I talked to either of you, um, it is not that you have to sort of commit to using this long term after this course. But I do think it's important that at this point, we have you nailed down as far as identifying what your topic and research question is going to be, at least as far as you go through this course, because we will be getting to the point where assignments, and we're kind of already at this point where the assignments build on each other. You do a literature review, and then the next time you do uh, you do a literature review, and then the next time you build up with the hypotheses, and then you build up with the method section and all that sort of stuff. And so I wanted you to I want you to have both your research topic and your research question nailed down by the time this week is over, so that as you move on with the other assignments, you will have a direction to go. Um, I do realize that you've already turned in your references list, but your references list can be uh, related to your general topic. Your research question is much more specific than your research topic, and the references list can be related to the um, research, the general research topic. So you can have a lot of different research questions under your general research uh, topic. So, if, for instance, um, you are interested in studying altered states of consciousness, um, you can your references list, if it articles related to altered states of consciousness studies, there are a lot of different research questions that those articles would be relevant for. So, with your references list, you're kind of okay with just having a general research topic, although I would want you to have had a question that you were working on at least. Um, but as we move on, you really need to have your research question nailed down. So, if you don't, by the time you see this, or if we have not spoken, give me a call. You have my cell phone, 724-433 5467, and then we will talk about ways of sort of nailing down your research topic. Okay, so tonight, for tonight's lecture, other than the parts where it's going to be rather short, well, not very short, but about half the length of typical lecture, because my plan had been to spend at least half the class getting everybody on board as far as your specific research question. So we're going to have to do that separately rather than as a group. Okay. So I want to pick up on where we are as far as formulating your literature review, and I sort of in the video lecture talked about talked about using Google Scholar and similar search engines to find relevant research and to sort of decide if the research you're looking at relates to what um, you need. And I kind of wanted to pick up on that. One thing that I sort of was sort of towards the end of the video lecture and I thought was very important was to talk about using a list of keywords. And um, keywords can be essential because different authors use different terms for their studies. Um, and a good example, I had an article that I was using for some materials about this, and they gave some examples. And one example they gave as far as how coming up with a list of keywords is important was they gave an example of how many different words can be used in the research to describe teenagers. Uh, and they gave a number four that pop right up there. Teenagers is one. So some researchers use the word teenagers. Some use the word adolescence. Some may use the word youth. Um, some may use the term, I believe teenagers now are referred to as Generation Z. So that may be another one. Uh, so um, those are all keywords that you would want to use in your search because they all are ones that could make reference to teenagers. So you could have a number of studies that use the word teenagers to describe their focus population, but then you could have another uh, group that uses the term adolescents. So there are a lot of different terms that are used in the literature to reference studies that are done on teenagers. So that's one thing that you want to keep in mind. And in fact, um, you saw that when I was doing the video lecture, because I talked about how I was bring up the example of doing a study of college freshmen compared to college seniors, and then um, I made reference to how uh, there were studies where the term freshman was used, but studies where the term first year students was used. And that you then had the added issue of lately, there has been sort of an active, ongoing process of trying to remove the word freshman from colleges and for many research because it's considered to be sexist language. So there are, and in my opinion, they haven't come up with any definite alternative. There's a variety of them out there, um, but none of them seem to have become the standard. So you have to find a whole bunch of literature, and it's weird when you Google freshman um, in Google Scholar, one set of articles that you can get relates to the topic of criticizing the word freshman and then suggesting alternatives. So often, so in this case, you put in the word freshman to find out what people who have criticized use of that word suggest you use instead. So there's a way of using a problematic word to find the alternatives. So, but that's just so that's an example of why finding keywords and developing a list of keywords from mostly from the research that you use, the research that you find. Finding a set of keywords is very important because you want to try and make sure you're covering all the relevant research out there. And doing that requires that you find and use all the terms that researchers are using for the constructs that you're trying to review. So you want, as you move forward, you want to come up with a list of um, of keywords that are going to be important for your study. So I talked to you about how you use Google Scholar, and certainly there are others. Um, Google Scholar, EBSCO, uh, JSTOR, Project Muse is good for social sciences. Academia is another one. So there's a lot of different search engines out there, not to mention using the ones that you have with the school that you're attending. CIHS has their own on Moodle. So there's a lot of different search engines. So what you do, so where I kind of left you off with this discussion of Google Scholars, you find all the relevant research again. You get the keywords and you go through your search engine to find um, all the relevant research articles that you can find. Now, when you get to the articles, you want to start to determine which one is most relevant for your study. Now, as you probably know, but I will make sure that this point is stressed, when you are reviewing articles, this is not an all or none thing. Just because your article isn't like globally um, relevant to your study, or at the, sort of glaringly directly related to what you're looking at, doesn't mean it can't have useful information. So what I want to talk to you about is what are some of the main pieces of information you want to pull from an article to find out if there's anything useful in it for you. So some of the questions you want to ask for each publication, each research article you look at, are some of the questions are, what questions or problem is the author addressing? Because even if it doesn't relate directly to the question you're looking at, it may be close or have some connection to the question that you're asking. What are the key concepts and how are they defined? When you're at the early stage of your research, one of the ways that any article that just generally addresses the topic you're interested in, even if it's a different research question, is to help you define what the terms mean. Um, I uh, I do not have to have a study of, if I have an article on self-esteem in older individuals, I can, one of the pieces of information that can be useful, even if I am studying self-esteem in teenagers, is that that article is likely to have a definition of self-esteem. And you want that. One key thing in any research you conduct is objective definition. What do you mean by the term? And so self esteem would be one. What exactly is self esteem? Well, any article that's well written on self esteem, I can use to provide me with a definition of what self esteem means. Another question that you want to ask of any article you review: what are the key theories, models, and methods? So, again, this whole idea of, even if the article you're reading doesn't relate to the same population you're looking at, um, it can give you the key theory or models that are being used. Again, going back to self esteem. If I'm studying self esteem in older adults, in teenagers, but I have an article on self esteem in older adults, that the theories that are used about what self esteem is and how it operates would be the same regardless of the population that I'm using. Next question. Does the research use established frameworks or take an innovative approach? Again, no matter what population you're using compared to what the article is, a review of all the articles can give you a sense of A, what is the standard way to approach questions about this topic? And on the other side, what are some of the more innovative ways that people are studying? One example might be if you're doing a qualitative study, um, reviewing qualitative studies on the same concept but with different populations can give you a very good idea of what sorts of questions to ask. Because one of the things you have to do with a qualitative study that you don't have to do with a quantitative study most of the time is with qualitative study, you have to defend why you are using the questions in your survey that you are using. Usually, with a quantitative study, you would have researched instruments already in place that have already been used, that have already been studied, that all have already been validated. So, um, with qualitative studies, you may need some support for using the questions that you're going to use and studying other qualitative studies, even if they are on a different population or asking a different research question, can still be useful for showing you the types of questions that are being asked. Next question. What are the results and conclusions of the study? Again, um, you probably, looking at the results and conclusions of the study, um, can give you some ideas of things you may want to include in your paper. If someone is studying self esteem in older adults and you're studying self esteem in teenagers, you may be able to use the conclusions and results they found to say, well, they found it with this population, so it is reasonable to say we would find similar results for our population, or the opposite. They found these results for older adults. We are studying the opposite end of the age spectrum. And because of that difference, here is why we would expect that our results would be different. Because this is what we know as the differences between what happens to older adults and what happens to teenagers. Um, you want to look at when you review each study, one thing you want to ask is, does the research confirm, add to, or challenge established knowledge? So you want to kind of build in your literature review what you know, what this study adds to what we already know about the concepts you are studying. Next question you want to ask: how does the publication contribute to your understanding of the topic? Um, sometimes, sometimes making use of research is a twofold process. At the beginning, all you're doing is trying to get a general understanding on your own about the topic, so you know which way you want to go. Now, when you later you sit down and formally write the literature review, you may go back to the article and find specific pieces of information that you want to include in your article. But sometimes when you are reviewing literature to start with, you just start taking notes on what it tells you and what it adds to your understanding of the topic. What are its key insights and arguments? That's another thing you want to try to take away from each research. And what are the strengths and weaknesses of the research? Um, so what you do is you review each of these pieces of literature. Is you review each and you take notes on them. And part of the reason you want to make sure you take notes on each article that you review is because you want to make sure that you cite the points that you bring up in the article, in your article. you want to make sure that any points you are using that you got from somewhere else, that you are referencing that somewhere else, that you are referencing that article. Um, um, One thing that's probably very important to keep in mind is when you're right is that in the academic world, this is more of a practical issue. Um, Citations are meaningful. Many academics um, build their reputations based on the number of times that their articles are cited. And so it people will catch you if you make points and you don't cite their names, because people are looking for that. They're looking to see if their data is cited in literature. People will look for that. They'll look for your citation. Um, and you can be accused of plagiarism if you make a point that someone else made, but you don't cite where that point was made. One thing that you probably already know, but is worth repeating, is that it's really hard to oversight. In other words, it's hard, it's difficult to have too many citations. I've never seen an article reviewed, criticized, edited, whatever, where the author was criticized on citing uh, uh, too many too many authors, where they were using too many citations. I've seen a number of them um, where I've seen a number of them where they've been criticized for not citing enough, but but rarely, if I don't remember ever seeing anyone criticized for citing too much. So you want to keep that in mind, that it's hard to oversight your research. Okay, so you take these things and you keep track of every article that you're reading, and then as you move on, what you start to do is you use this information, and what you will do is you'll sort of write summaries of every article that you're reviewing, and then you'll kind of tie things together, and you'll start to notice themes, debates, and gaps in the knowledge. uh, so you want to look at questions as you're reviewing the literature as a whole. You want to look at questions like, do certain approaches become more or less popular over time? um, what questions or concepts reoccur across the literature? Where do different sources disagree? Where does there seem to be disagreement? Are there any influential theories or studies that change the direction of the field? One thing you want to keep an eye out for across the research is, does the same name keep popping up? Is there one name that seems to pop up more than others? One name, one article, anything along those lines. And then as you're looking, as you're piecing together, as you're sort of grouping together all the literature that you find, you want to look at what seems to be missing. Is there anything that seems to be missing from the literature review? Okay, and then you do that, you move on to writing your literature review that serves as the basis of your introduction for your article. Okay, that's a good place to stop. I will record another video lecture on Monday. And please let me know as you move forward, as if you're having any questions, sort of finalizing your research question, please call me, text me, or send me an email. All right, take care, everybody.